discussing all of the data coming on in, because he was quite fascinated, that there was a tendency for these longer range things to show up months in advance, as if you will, sort of a little trickle, and then gradually build over time until we could get a better focus on them. So indeed, you're quite correct. The longer term, or the larger the emotional impact, the further out ahead of it we will see that event.
In terms of 9/11 then, could you, or did you guys find out what actually was going to happen, or was it more that this will be a big emotional resonance here, but we don't know exactly where or what will happen? Or can you find out more details at that point when you see something coming, so to speak, on the horizon? Can you target in on that more specifically and find out more details about it?
Yes, we can, and we have our original post at George's urban survival site, which was basically like 1 or 2 paragraphs about what I called Screwy Theory 153. And it describes what we saw sort of coming. But here's our issue. At that point in 2001, I had my lexicon. It had 300,000 words, but I was only up to the M's in terms of getting an emotional quantifier attached to the major words. So I hadn't reached the point where I could have quantified the T words and picked up terrorism. So our description shows it as being an accident plus military. Somehow we knew it was going to be a, quote, military accident. And that's what came through in the data sets. And I'm convinced it was because we didn't have the word terrorism modeled. If we'd had terrorism modeled, that would have risen to a higher level of archetype, and then the accident and military would have made sense under the idea of a terrorist act. So basically what it was a limited structure on the lexicon, because bear in mind I started off looking for words that were essentially associated with the economic system, in bonds and stocks and all that kind of stuff. So I had a lot of those words modeled, but I didn't have a lot of the more general words modeled. And in fact, it took us until 2003, I think, to go through that initial 300,000 words.
There you go. And what would happen, so to speak, if a government, for instance, is trying to put out propaganda about something? They're trying to put out information or even misinformation about something in order to create a consensus, so to speak. Is this also something that would be reflected, and can you discover if it is indeed true or false information?
Well, we can see if it's true or false information, but we don't really ever go there. We do indeed see what we call memering, where the government is engineering a meme or thought virus, or let's not say government. The powers that be is an easier and better description.
Right.
Even though indeed their arm in getting it out might be the government, more often than not it's the propagandic mainstream press. But the point is well taken, and that is that the government can indeed engineer thought viruses that they wish to have sweep through the population at large, and they do it all the time. From our viewpoint, the factual value of the position that they're taking is neither here nor there. It is this rather forceful, if you will. Let me put it this way. When a memering episode occurs, the number of words being used is limited, and it has a shock value through the data that is easily seen within our both visual representation and within the emotional sums because of the limited number of words. So it's like they take a limited number of talking point words and their propaganda arm just use them over and over and over and over and over again, and we get this emotional spike, if you will, that's very easy to pick out.
Very interesting. And considering the background in regards to watching the money market and so forth, could you guys see anything in regards to the financial crash or whatever we want to call it that actually began about over a year ago now?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We were actually ahead of things on the very first time I used that to any effect was actually in the year 2000. As a former Microsoft Consulting Services subcontractor, I had put some of the money I had made from them and purchased a few Microsoft stock, like 40 shares or something. Anyway, I used the software and it said, basically it said, bad things are coming, so I sold all of the Microsoft stock. And 2 weeks later, the whole thing fell apart in the year 2000. So it has indeed worked very well that way. And in a general sense, we were about a year ahead. First off, we started seeing our death of the dollar words in 2002. So that'll give you an idea of how much of an impact that's going to have in the coming year or so. the fact that we had seen it out 7 years in advance of its real first appearance in 2008, 2009, according to your postulate, means it's going to have a tremendous impact. So, as an instance, the tsunami, we first got a hint of that 8 months out. So 300,000 people perish, and we had a land pushed back to a previous age, and we get an 8-month warning. So a 7-year warning is going to really be a globe-altering event. In any event, though, the stock market stuff we'd actually were able to peg the day of the most risk to the system, and that later on it came out we were within, the central bank and warfare model for the western part of the planet, was within 3 hours of a meltdown on October 7th. And it was at that, we'd been saying for a year that October 7th would be the particular day of risk. Even though the stock market or whatever, the financial system started to appear to come unraveled on the 15th of September of the 2008, the point of maximum stress was October 7th, and then we had a 5-month level of release language, as was forecast. And so again, we're at that same position where our data now is indicating that in the future we have the next phase of this ongoing soap opera of the dollar death, and it will arrive very shortly.
Well, I definitely want to get in here a little bit later here, more about not only in terms of the financial situation, but also other events here in the future and so forth. But a few more things I want to ask you before that. How about... Sure. Correlating experiments, how would you say that this is different, or rather, can you use information from, for example, the Noosphere Princeton University project? They have these little eggs that apparently also, in one way or another, help to quote unquote predict 9/11, or at least they picked up something on the event before that. They don't know what it was going to be, but just that it was going to be big and have an impact. Can you look at their data as well and correlate with what you guys do?
Probably, but that would be a whole lot of work, and I'm lazy. So, and we couldn't do it in real time in a running fashion and make any sense of it. I understand why theirs did as it does, and that is because we live in an energetic universe, and they were picking up the first wave of that energy. Ours seems to pick it up much longer term in advance, and I believe that's because the human body is a much greater antenna, if you will. The human mind or consciousness is a greater antenna than is the random number generators used in the noosphere.
Oh, that is interesting. That's something we definitely can go into more later on here. But one thing I was thinking about as well is how do you present this information then? Do you have reports that you write for halfpasthuman.com, or how do you go about presenting some of this data that you guys find?
Yeah, that's correct. At the moment, we are producing reports under the title The Shape of Things to Come. They're available off of halfpasthuman.com. They're $10 US to purchase a report. They're presented in more or less a newsletter fashion. They're mostly very dense text because it's an interleaving of the actual words that we find within the extracts, within the data processing, and we attempt to put those words into a context that more or less reads like a narrative, but it's a very dense narrative, almost as though one is navigating some kind of an subconscious. So to a certain extent, it probably reads a lot like Ulysses, as I remember James Joyce's Ulysses reading, only in a grander scale, not so much personally focused. So people need to be aware of that. It's also very grim. This is because of the way in which I started defining the emotions at the beginning of the project. It was, of course, very easier to assign an emotional value to a more extreme emotion than to a subtle one. And so, therefore, we have a tendency to have our data natively or naturally as an artifact of our processing bring back more extreme emotions, which has a tendency to color our reports in a more extreme fashion. And we find that really rarely does the future present itself in quite that level of extreme, although many of the extreme words we use will indeed show up in the press after the event. Knowing them in advance has a tendency to color your thinking, and so again, you need to be aware of that. In other words, this is as bad as it will get is sort of a subtitle to the reports.
There we go. And how often do you guys put out reports approximately?
It's working out now at about once every quarter, so once every 3 months or so because of the amount of work and the reports run about 50 pages of actual interpretation and maybe 1 or 2 charts involved. But as I say, it takes us between 18 days and 3 or 4 weeks of pre-processing to gather the data. So a rather lengthy time involved. But we're trying to, it's not ever going to be able to go to monthly. The best we could probably do would be something every other month. And I don't know that we'll get to that point. Once every 3 months seems to be about right. We can project out 3 months with some confidence, and beyond that with even greater confidence, actually out to about 6 or 8 months. So it gets a nice view. And I find that the data changes over time. It's unfortunately for us, I think Terence McKenna is right, and there's some form of time compression, if you will, as we approach this 2012 business. And as a result of that, there appears to be more events, more data for us to process. So in fact, it may turn out that we're going to have to lengthen the cycle just because of the amount of data.
There you go. So so what you've been able to assess in a way so far then is that this the time compression that you mentioned here, that is actually something that is taking place. I mean, I just mentioned it here in the beginning as well, so to speak, that it's almost impossible to keep an eye on everything that's going on. But this is correlated as well in terms of what you guys are finding then?
Oh, it's empirically measurable, correct. I mean, ever since basically the first 200 executable programs that I wrote are still in use today. The additional 130 or so I've put in for display purposes or tuning or whatever. But nonetheless, so the software is basically run against an internet that has grown over time, but even factoring that out, we're still seeing within those same 200 programs an increased workload, even though much of the internet is actually reduced to us in the sense that we can't reach certain points of Australia, China, etc. So yeah, I'm quite convinced that we're being presented with empirical evidence of this time compression. And
are there specific kind of, I guess, big trends that you follow, or do you let the information that comes out speak for itself, and that is the trend, so to speak, for that time period that you are going to follow up on?
The latter. We run in what's known as serendipitous mode. We can run deterministically, so I can take the software and provide it with seed words and only look at certain elements that come back from those seed words, or I can run in the serendipitous mode, which is the way I usually like to do it, just because of the surprise, actually. But to let it go out, find the seed words, then go out and read up to 2,048 words on either side of the seed word, find and extract lexical lengths from that, and then use those to go off and hunt and bring back another set of words to begin the immediacy data grabs. So it's actually removed from my control as to what the words will be.